more in depth about these issues and our children. Cathy Pultz is president of the Upper Arlington Education Coalition, and Kevin Magruder is the associate professor of history at Antioch College. And we welcome you both into this discussion. You know, Professor Magruder, why is it that the mere mention of race creates such a framework of black versus white? They become like polarizing magnets and everybody takes sides. Why?
I think our country has a hard time acknowledging that we were founded by separation based on race, that slavery was the foundation of the economy. In the early days of our country, our Constitution protected that element of the economy, and justification for slavery was based on race. And once slavery was over, all of those ideas about black inferiority did not disappear. And segregation, Jim Crow, all of those things that the civil rights movement tried to overturn, still, those things have not really been addressed. And so there are some people who think all of that's in the past and we should just forget about it. But as Abraham Lincoln said, you can't escape history. And that's something that our country has a really hard time confronting.
You know, Cathy, some would say using critical race theory to explain social inequality, especially when most people are experiencing inequality, is a non-starter.
I would agree that with critical race theory, I'm not sure why that is in the elementary schools, it's in the middle schools, it's in the high schools. It started out, they say that it's for law school, and I have an issue with teaching the children that the color of your skin impacts who you are from the moment you're born. That when you also are focusing on equity instead of the word equality, and certainly our country did have slavery, we did have Jim Crow laws, and our children are being taught that in schools. But my question would be, what is the outcome we're expecting from second graders learning about critical race theory? Why do they need to know that? Where are we going with that? Why is one group of people an oppressor and the other group is oppressed? And from what I've heard about critical race theory, those are your only two options. You are either, if you're white, you're racist, and if you're a black child, then you must be oppressed.
You know, Professor Magruder, you take a very hard line on COVID protocols and the mask. Obviously, and this could be because of the midterm elections, people are moving away from the mask mandates and also in schools. But your perspective is that we should not lessen the role of masks, we should increase it. Is that in the best interest of the child?
I've never said anything. I've never said anything about masks, so I'm not sure what the source of your information is. But I haven't written anything about that, and I haven't spoken publicly about it.
Well, you know, sometimes we make assumptions that are false. You get a chance to talk about it. Right. Your feelings about masks?
I think we should follow public health measures. And public health, what it is it incorporates science, but also the way human beings work and how they behave. And I'm 64, so I'm old enough to remember polio. And people were not resistant to taking the polio vaccine once it became available. And I believe that COVID has been politicized. We have 900,000 people dead in this country, and a lot of them shouldn't be. If we had listened to public health measures and had not politicized it. And so I think, and those public health measures vary depending on where you are in the country, what the infection rates are. Like whether you need to wear a mask or not is not a blanket decision. It depends on where you are, and that's epidemiology. And so that's what I believe, but I haven't written anything about that or spoken about it publicly before now.
Thank you. Ms. Pultz, how do educators, how is it that they have to adjust their curriculum to not only embed critical race theory, but also anti-racism? And then what about the argument where some are saying that it's not even in the curriculum in the first place?
I'll address that part first, because most schools don't say, here's your critical race theory class, and we're going to have that second period. But many of the terminology, like say using the term white privilege, microaggression, those things are used in the classroom, they're used by teachers. I think the biggest part with that is our schools just need to be transparent. You have the teacher union saying it's not being taught, but then they pass the national ones pass a resolution that it should be. So I think what parents are really looking for is honesty and transparency from their teachers, from the school boards, from the superintendents. And I think in the last few years, the positive thing about COVID is it's really pulled the curtain back from what's going on in our schools, and parents really need to start paying attention. And some of the school board meetings that were shown in the earlier clip, it's parents want to know what's going on, and they don't appreciate some of the things that have been done behind their backs.
Professor Kevin Magruder teaches history at Antioch College, and Cathy Pultz is president of the Upper Arlington Education Coalition. We're going to just continue this discussion, not just about critical race theory, but also about masks and their mandates and other issues that involve our children in the larger society. Goodbye. Let's turn our attention now to the parents and let them have their say in this debate about education and about masks. We're joined by Andrea Gross and Amy Gonzalez. We welcome them both to the program. So what do you think their ultimate goal is? Because I think everybody will agree that the priority should be that the children learn, that they're educated, so they become productive citizens to society. So what do you think is their ultimate goal or the arterial goal?
I think the ultimate goal is right now is to silence parents because they do not want a collaboration between the parents and the schools. And, we, as Martin Luther King didn't give his speech in a basement. And that's because if you're really proud of what you're doing and you really believe in, its truth and the value, then you would be fine to shout it out at the rooftops to anybody that wants to listen to it. But we're finding that this all involves a lot of just behind the scenes, a lot of things that are not transparent, like in our case, for example, unlike schools in the public situation, which again, that's another divisive thing. We find that everything is about trying to find division between races, between genders, between public and private. And we have found through this journey that teen parent is really what we all are. Whether you're in public or you're in private, we all really want the same things. We want our kids to be safe and, again, like you said, educated. But what we don't want is the normalization and the desensitization and sexualization, for example, of our kids, which we do.
And I think ultimately what we ask is, what are you teaching our children? And what will they have learned when they leave here? And when you cannot get a forthright and candid answer from, if you're in public, your superintendent or your board of trustees, in our case, that just points, the alarm bells go off for sure.
I think then we need to go a little deeper here, because to me, I don't even want to sit here and have a debate of whether parents should be involved in their child's education. To anyone with a modicum of common sense, it's obvious you should be involved not only in their education, but all aspects of their lives. Those are your children. You care about them more and understand them better than anybody else. So we're not going to have that debate. But why would unions and other special interest groups set up dynamics to over-sexualize the kids, to teach what they consider to be critical race theory? You know what your kid is being taught in the curriculum. You know what other parents are saying. So it's not as if we're talking out of both sides of our mouth. This is what everybody's saying. So what is their true agenda? What do they want?
I think they want ultimately to control the narrative. And I mean, this has been a long game.
And to make a lot of money off of it.
And they make a lot of money off of it. I mean, like in the private school situation, there is literally an entire complex of consulting firms that make tens of millions of dollars every year off of this indoctrinating agenda.
And they target with surveys even here in Central Ohio, our public schools. The surveys are being filled out, sometimes for the littlest of children by the teachers. And then this information gets sold. The data collection ends up following your child through their entire education and could possibly end up in government databases. So a lot of people are making money off of these surveys. In our case, they did a gender survey where they enticed the children with gift cards that were supposedly anonymous. You could take the survey anonymously, but you would be able to find out if you want a gift card, pizza, ice cream. And the survey results went to the University of Pennsylvania and were ultimately up for sale.
Well, I want to tell you this, okay? And even though I'm moderating this crisis in education, no parent is going to sit around and allow anyone to cripple or marginalize their child. And while they may have felt that you've been sleeping at the wheel, is one thing that COVID did do, it brought about an awakening where you could not ignore the facts and what is obvious. And they've awakened a sleeping giant. And why don't you tell the rest of the country, now that a sleeping giant is awakened, what you will not tolerate anymore and what you demand going forward?
Well, I just think as teen parent, we do have a right to know what our children are being taught, and there is accountability for that. In our case, we ended up last week filing a lawsuit to protect the interests of our children, and it's all children. It goes beyond our 3 kids and our school. It's every child. If we move the ball forward for transparency and accountability, all children will benefit.
And I think what's most important here, though, is that you've seen progress when you've decided to step in and lead the superintendent, the school board, anyone else. Because what you realize that if the people are not awakened and don't lead, you would have the same results and the same dismal what you're seeing in these schools in terms of what your child is becoming. Because sometimes children go home and their parents don't even recognize them anymore.
Absolutely.
That's often the case. It is. And that's why it's just so important that if you see something or you hear something that is untrue, it is a moral responsibility to speak up.
As a parent, we hear all the time, because we do have the private school situation in our particular circumstance. Well, then take your kids out of public schools and send them to private. And we keep on saying, no, in many circumstances, the private school situation is even worse. The kids have no freedom of speech. A lot of these contracts are being rewritten now where it goes beyond just the children or the parents. It could be anybody. In our case, they quelled our freedom of speech, not just our kids, and expelled our children. And they did nothing wrong. Our children.
The last question, and we are so grateful to have you both join us for this very critical conversation. How are your children?
They're resilient because children are. And our children are resilient kids. And I feel like they have been through a lot. We have all been through a lot. This has been not just trying to, this has been very difficult. I mean,
predatory alienation.
Yeah, they have tried to absolutely destroy our lives and make us out to be, as you can imagine, called us every name in the book. And yet here we are, and our shoulders are back, and we're still standing. And we are trying to show our children and all parents out there that
courage is contagious.
Yes,
courage is contagious.
But I think the message that you both are telling the world is that we're parents and we love our children, and we're going to make sure that we get what's best for our children in this school system.
They're the most
Absolutely.
vulnerable, absolutely.
But if you want to know any more about our case in particular or about private schools and the NAIS, there are a lot of parents across the country putting this information together. So you can go to Undercover Mother and figure out the NAIS. You can read a lot more about that. And if you want to help our particular situation, please go to Give, Send, Go and look up Columbus Academy, and you can learn more about what our case is about in Columbus.
Well, let me say this to you as the moderator. No one can ever walk in your shoes, because you just can't come on in a segment and everybody know the battle that you fought and what you continue to fight and what you endure and the price that you pay for it. Let me just thank you all for being courageous, willing to take a stand, and willing to sacrifice it all, to have it all for all future kids. And thank you so much for joining us, and God continue to bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you for this
Thank
opportunity.
you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And we'll be back. Don't go away. Critical race theory was a driving force in the November elections. As David Winter reports, school boards were a major target for parents.
There's a virus among us.
Only one of the Forest Hills School Board members who sat and listened to this concerned parent earlier this year is still on the board. The rest have been replaced.
I'm not talking about COVID-19. Virus I'm talking about is critical race theory.
The voters spoke on November the 2nd.
Sarah Jonas, a Forest Hills mom, is one of those new Forest Hills School Board members. She says she decided to run in part because of a poetry assignment her daughter brought home.
It was basically a social justice video, and that's the perfect example of the critical race theory language and framework entering the classroom.
You would think social justice would be taught in social studies classes.
Sure, so history should be taught, the good, the bad, the ugly. I totally agree with that. But when it comes to teaching our kids that there is, you're oppressed or you're an oppressor or you have implicit bias, microaggressions, all of that, those are components of critical race theory, which I don't want my children to be a part of.
And the voters agreed, also electing Katie Stewart, Bob Bibb, and Linda Marie Hausfeld. While Jonas was the only one of the four who spoke to us for this story, this is the remaining school board member whose seat was not up for grabs.
They hijacked school board elections across the country, and Forest Hills was no different.
Leslie Rasmussen says those four and beyond were primarily elected because they spread misinformation about CRT.
They have taken terms like diversity, equity, inclusion, and said that must be critical race theory. Well, we know that's not true.
But true or not, many voters believed their children were being taught that white people are oppressors, people of color are oppressed, and American institutions like the courts are biased against people of color.
There is nothing where teachers are saying, okay, you're white, so you are oppressing your fellow classmate who happens to be Black or Latino or Asian. That is not happening.
Those who are anti-critical race theory say CRT is absolutely being taught in these schools, and they have proof.
Dan Reginold leads the coalition StopCriticalRaceTheory.com. He has compiled a book he says contains dozens of examples of CRT.
On their digital sign, they say, all lives can't matter until Black lives do. Now, is that what we want to be teaching children in our schools?
The voters said no in Forest Hills and hundreds of other districts across the country. In Cincinnati, I'm David Winter reporting.
We welcome Brian Steele to the town hall. Brian ran unsuccessfully for Worthington School Board.